So hi everyone, my name is Killian. I work at Algorithm Watch. That's an organization that fights for better AI governance. And here's my colleague.
I'm Jill McArdle. I work for Beyond Fossil Fuels. We're normally an organization that works on the energy transition in the power sector. We don't normally work on tech, but data centers and AI have brought us into this big AI debate.
Yeah, both our organizations could be working on many other issues, but we really met over this topic of AI's energy consumption. And to kick us off, I wanted to show one brief example of a data center that has been built by xAI in Memphis, Tennessee, in the US. And what you can see here is like a thermal camera image of this massive data center, which is one of the biggest ones that X is running for their AI systems. And the little red dots around it are gas turbines that have been set up to power this data center. And that really gets us into the topic, and that's in a nutshell what we want to talk about right now. Why are data centers linked so much to fossil fuels, and what does AI have to do with it? But to zoom out and to give you a little bit more context, this is an image, what you see now on the slide, of the AI supply chain. Very simplified, the 5 steps that it takes for an AI system to be produced and to come about. And we want to look at some parts of this AI supply chain, and in particular we want to focus on the training of AI models and AI systems used, but also the hardware manufacturing and why it consumes so much energy and why it endangers our climate goals. While we focus on energy and on electricity in particular, it's important to mention that there is a huge amount of other environmental impacts along the supply chain of AI that are also really relevant. Data centers, for example, consume lots of land, especially sometimes in densely populated areas. Data centers consume lots of water, which can be a particular problem in very dry regions. You need to mine lots of minerals and rare earth to produce the hardware for the AI supply chain. And yeah, there's also a huge pile of trash, of e-waste that is being produced after the hardware is burned out. So lots of other environmental impacts, but we decided to focus on the energy and emissions nexus, right? And that's what we want to talk about right now for the next 20 minutes. And just to hand over to Jill in a bit, that has been looking at this in way more detail in a report. Here is a short graph that shows you how large the energy consumption can be of data centers. Because if you hear about total consumption, it can be 2 or 3%, sometimes globally, which doesn't sound that much. But if you look at it on a more on a closer level, for example, on the city level, the energy consumption can be huge. And for example, up to 80% in Dublin, which is one of the big data center hubs in Europe, or the biggest data center hub in Frankfurt, where it can be up to 40% of electricity consumption. And with that, Jill, please take over.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I wanted to talk to you about some research Beyond Fossil Fuels did into the energy demand from data centers in Europe and what that actually means for the climate. Just firstly to show you that we link data centers and AI because AI is driving a lot of the growth in data centers. It's not the whole of it. There are other things like the cloud and expansion, but AI plays a huge role, which is why the two debates are very interlinked. So Beyond Fossil Fuels wanted to know what was happening with the growth and what the implications were. So we calculated first, based on a few different sources that we had, what the growth could be in terms of electricity consumption of data centers in Europe by 2030. We got a high end and a low end between I'm not going to go into terawatt hours for you, you don't need to understand that. But basically we got something that the new data centers alone in Europe could equal the electricity consumption of Spain by 2030. That's just the new power demand, so not even the existing power demand that we have to deal with. So we asked 2 questions. We wanted to understand what happens if this is fueled by fossil fuels, largely, and what happens if it's largely fueled by renewable energy. Because we have good reason to think it could be fueled by fossil fuels. We know that the AI CEOs, the big tech companies, are desperate for energy at the moment, and they're willing to take it. As the ex-CEO of Google put it so starkly, we want energy in all forms, renewable, non-renewable, whatever. They just want energy, and they don't care at the moment if it's fueled by fossil fuels. They are buying a lot of renewables, but the question is, are they buying enough, and what does that actually do to the energy transition? So we think it could be fueled by fossil fuels. And if it is, clicker's not working. Yeah, surprise, surprise, we get a lot more emissions in Europe. So this is the upward trajectory of the growth and the upward trajectory of the emissions. This is the low end, this is the high end. At the high end, you've got emissions equal to all of the gas plants that Germany, Italy, and the UK are burning in one whole year, basically. So for Europe, that's a lot of emissions, especially when we have pretty tight carbon reduction goals that we need to meet by 2030 if we want to save the planet. So if it's fossil fuels, that's bad news. But also if it's renewables, we still have a problem. Because we ask the question, what happens if it's 100% fueled by renewables? This should solve the problem because there's no emissions. But the problem is the demand from data centers is so great that it's going to take a lot of the renewables that we are trying to bring online in the next few years. And if the data centers take the new renewables, that just forces other sectors that are trying to decarbonize, that are trying to electrify, like transport or steel or other sectors, that pushes them onto fossil fuels because there isn't enough renewables for the other sectors that need it. So either way, if you have this huge demand growth, you create more fossil fuels, you create more emissions. So we started to realize that the demand from data centers was a problem that needed to be addressed more systematically. And to sum up, oh, it's not working.
Maybe
Clicker down.
Point to the computer.
Point to the computer, right.
Yeah.
I'm so good at tech. Oh yeah. It's not just the data centers. It's also like the semiconductors. So it's not just the semiconductors, the microchips when they're inside the data center and they're running. You can all hear me? Okay. Good. Sorry, I don't know how to help you. It's not just the data centers when they're running, it's also when you're making the microchips. When you're using electricity to make them, you also create a lot of emissions. This is a great video from Greenpeace East Asia on the dark side of AI and the microchip production that shows this is the growth in emissions from microchips for AI in 1 year. So from 2023 to 2024, it quadrupled. And this is only going up and up and up. Point at the screen. So, to sum up, we have a fossil fuel problem with data centers. I'll hand back to you now.
Thanks. I'll just leave that up for a second because it's almost funny slide. And now that Jill explained the entire problem of the increasing energy consumption, I wanted to spend a little bit of time in explaining why is that actually happening. What is behind that? Why is AI such a big part of that? And one aspect is the training of AI models, because back in the day we used to look at AI and the training was energy intensive, but it was not, it was still okay, it was manageable. But what really has changed is that there's a bigger is better paradigm in AI development. And the models that are being trained are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you can see that here on this chart that there's an increasing number of parameters, and that means an increasing number of calculations that needs to happen. And the big models that we're talking about, sometimes they're called large language models or generative AI. You all heard about ChatGPT. It's all the same paradigm. We process even ever more data points to get a better model, and that is just really, really energy intensive. But there's a second aspect to that, because training at some point is done for an AI model. Then we still have the AI system use. And again, back in the day, that was not such a big deal because then the use, like one query, one request to an AI system, only consumed very little energy. But that also changed now. For one, because an AI models get increasingly used. Like we get lots of requests for AI models. Lots of people use it. For example, when you reload your Facebook newsfeed, a whole bunch of AI models are being processed in the background to rank your newsfeed. And then you have like a little bit of an energy consumption for one request, but if that happens billions of times a day, that really adds up. And you can add up with like lots of rebound effects, meaning that you end up having a higher energy consumption, although you're trying to be more efficient. And the second aspect is that AI is really built into all our devices, all our applications these days. You have it in the Google search or in the Bing search or wherever where you get AI summaries automatically or in an automated fashion. You have all these AI agents being rolled out. I already mentioned the ranking algorithms. Also, image classification and object recognition is very energy intensive if you use it. Also, things like Google Maps, calculating routes, updating them once the traffic is changing, and so on. So AI is really being built and pushed upon by the companies wherever we go. That's important to mention that it's not consumer demand necessarily that drives this, but really the big tech companies that are searching for a business model and they're pushing this upon us, and we don't really have a consumer choice whether we want AI in all our things or not. And with that, Jill, you taking over again.
I have the clicker again. Yeah, so a little bit about these companies and what they're doing and what they're not doing and what they should be doing to deal with these problems. So firstly, here's some news headlines about some of the big tech companies. A few years ago, these companies came out with very impressive sounding climate commitments to be carbon negative, carbon neutral, fossil free by 2030. Today, we're seeing them say, oh, we're not sure we can actually do this because they're in the frenzy of this race to build the most dominant AI model. So you're seeing that their emissions are shooting up and they're starting to acknowledge that actually they might have a problem hitting their climate goals. This is to say, this is Microsoft and Google who actually have had quite credible climate commitments. And so it's at least they're being transparent right now by saying, we may have a problem meeting these goals. Amazon is a slightly different story because Amazon did not have such credible climate commitments to begin with. So I'm pointing at the wrong direction again. Yep. There we go. So this is one of the key problems we face in trying to get the data centers off fossil fuels and onto renewable energy. It's a little bit technical, but it has very important real-world consequences. You might have seen this from Amazon last year, where they announced that they became 100% renewable 7 years ahead of schedule. Great, fantastic, we can all go home. The climate crisis is completely solved. Of course, it's not, because what they really mean when they say they're 100% renewable, they mean they're buying renewable energy certificates, and these are annually matched against their real energy consumption. And the problem with these certificates today is that you end up with this kind of perverse situation, that a data center can claim to be solar powered at night, because a company can buy a certificate from, say, renewable energy that's produced during the day in Spain, and they can use that to offset the fossil fuel energy or the whatever energy they're really using to power their data center that might be in Germany, that might be running at nighttime. And the problem is there's very little incentive in this system for the companies to actually buy renewable energy that's directly deliverable to their data center. And that's what we need. That's where we need to go if we actually want to get our grids. That's more for a renewable energy conversation. If we want to decarbonize our grids and get them onto renewables, the energy you buy needs to be deliverable, it needs to be local, it needs to be hourly matched to your data center. So we know where we need to go. The problem that this creates today is that you end up with a big gap between the company's reported emissions and their actual data center emissions. So The Guardian did this study that came up with a 662% gap between the reported emissions from data centers from the big companies and what we call location-based emissions, so the real emissions on the ground are. So we need to change this system, make it more credible. Google, for example, is on board to do this, but companies like Amazon and Meta down here are doing what we can call like lobby efforts to try and push us towards an even worse system. So they have this emissions first partnership. We don't need to go into the details. I'd be happy to tell you about it, where they're really pushing for more of an offsetting approach to renewable energy, so they don't have to worry about the energy on the actual grid where they're operating. And I just wanted to mention briefly that it's not just energy where they're doing offsetting, it's also in water. So here is from The Guardian as well that showed that companies like Amazon and Google are claiming to be water positive, while some areas where they're building data centers have, let's say, They could be drought-affected areas, and there's not a lot of water in those regions. Now, the problem with water offsetting is that it does not matter to you if you're in a drought-affected region if Google or Amazon is buying water and putting it somewhere else in the world. This has no impact on the drought-affected region. So offsetting, whether it's energy or whether it's water, really doesn't work as a strategy for reducing emissions or fixing climate impacts. So what else are the companies are doing? You might also see a lot of news about nuclear energy. So Google, Amazon, Microsoft, they're all signing major deals to either bring small modular reactors online or to restart nuclear power plants. Now, the problem is the small modular reactors, they don't exist, and they are unlikely to exist in the next 5 years. They certainly won't exist. They may not exist in the next 10 years. So they're not coming in anytime soon to fix this problem. Nuclear, big nuclear as well, is going to take a very, very long time to build. It's extremely expensive and extremely risky. So these are not solutions to the short and mid-term energy crunch that we're facing from data centers. And the companies know this. And they know that it's really between fossil fuels and renewable energy. And they are promoting this as a bit of a distraction, which is why we think they're putting their heads in the sand a bit. And one thing I wanted to mention, the last thing I wanted to mention about what the companies are doing is that they're starting to posit that it doesn't really matter the emissions from data centers, the emissions from semiconductors, because AI is going to come in to solve the problem. So here you have the ex-CEO of Google saying, we're not going to hit our climate goals, let's just bet on AI and let's not worry about it. Here you have the head of Brad Smith, the head of Microsoft, saying, yes, our climate goals are out of reach, but we're pretty optimistic that AI is going to do so much good that it's going to solve this problem. Here you have the Google pushing the idea that Europe's climate goals can be met with AI, and Amazon also talking about AI. And really, this is a way for the companies to deflect attention from the actual impacts of AI that we're seeing today. Because it's fine to have this conversation, but there is no substantive evidence today that AI is actually going to be able to offset climate emissions in the future. It's very speculative, and this is very risky because today we have real-world emissions that we need to deal with. And yeah, still me?
Yep.
So in terms of what we can do about this, well, we think that the bare minimum is that the companies need to be committing not to use fossil fuels for their data center and AI expansion. They have the money, they have the resources, and they need to get serious about this and maybe stop with some of the more distracting politics that they're engaged in. But we're not seeing a lot of action from the companies on this. As I said, they buy renewables, but their growth is vastly outstripping the renewables that they're buying. So we're going to be waiting a long time for the companies to solve the problem. But luckily, it's not just the companies working on this. We have a whole campaign of civil society groups engaged who are asking for AI systems to be made compatible with planetary boundaries. We're asking for the phase out of fossil fuels, to think about computing within sustainable limits, to think about companies cleaning up their supply chains, to have more justice and participation in the rollout of data centers and AI so that local communities actually have a say in this. Today we're going in the opposite direction where local communities are not being listened to because states think that AI and data centers are critical infrastructure, so they just don't care if a local community is objecting to a data center, for example. And we need transparency, which brings me back to Killian.
Yeah, transparency about environmental impacts of AI is really a critical demand, and it sounds like an afterthought, but it's really, really important because we come across that issue time and again, that you have companies that are called OpenAI or something like that and running completely closed models, not disclosing any relevant information, leaving us in the dark about what the actual resource and energy consumption is, what the environmental impacts are, and so on. And we see that also in politics, where we try to advocate for better regulation, better governance of this problem, that the corporate lobbying against that is really strong, saying, nah, this is too complicated, we cannot measure this, and so on. So what we did is really look into whether that's true and how we can push back. And this is a slide that shows you again this AI supply chain in the different phases, from building the hardware to the e-waste pile at the end. And we thought about how can we actually measure and what methods do we have to measure all these environmental impacts. because the corporate lobbyists were so successful in saying this is impossible to measure and we cannot do it. And we looked at and we saw that there's actually quite a few, and for most regions there is enough, for most phases there is enough methods, and we can know how to do that. The green dots are where we have established methods to calculate resource consumption. The red ones are where we don't have them at the moment or where we couldn't find any. But also there, it's really not rocket science, especially not if you claim to solve all the problems with your product. That we could also, for the deployment phase of AI, really come up with good measurement methods. And there's lots of research being done in that space. But the sad truth is, at the moment, we still don't know how much energy and how much resources AI systems actually consume. And that needs to change. That is just to explain what this transparency demand is. That would also allow us to make more targeted policy proposals for the different issues once we understand the problem fully. The last one is you again.
Nearly the final click. So yeah, just a little bit more on the transparency. You can see this very technical slide I have here. So there are efforts to measure the energy use of different AI models. This is the Hugging Face AI Energy Score, which you can look up. They are running into problems, of course, that they have to do a bit of guesswork because, as Killian mentioned, some of the bigger models, they're closed models. Like OpenAI is actually a closed model. So it's really hard to see inside the model to see how much energy it's using. And without that transparency, you can't make a benchmark to compare the different energy uses from the different models. Data centers too, from the big tech companies, there's a big lack of transparency. So we don't know the emissions per site of data centers. This is not something that the companies are disclosing. We don't know the third-party data centers of these companies. So half of what they build for data centers is their own, their hyperscales. The other half is space they rent in co-location data centers. And they'll give you some information about one half of that, so the ones they build themselves. They'll give you some information about the energy and emissions. Usually it's aggregate, though, and very hard to actually dig into. But for their leased data center space, the co-location space, they shove that into this third section of their emissions reporting, and it's very hard to discern any concrete information about that, but that's half of their emissions. There is a scheme in Europe at the moment. There is a law that companies have to report some of this emission to the EU and to member states. To this date, I think the deadline was 2 months ago, and apparently less than 10% of companies have reported, and there's a big inertia from member states, from companies who are not willing to give this information. But as Killian said, if we don't have this information, this basic information, we can't do anything to solve any of the rest of the problems that we have. So it's really important that we start there and we enforce these rules on the companies. Of course, today, the EU is kind of sliding towards deregulation because they're looking at the US and they're thinking, maybe we don't have space for regulation. But as we've hopefully shown, we absolutely need this type of regulation if we're going to make any dent in this problem.
Yes, we need regulation. That is the one. If you take one message away from this talk, that's really it. Because if anyone can name one major industry that ever solved their environmental problems by itself, please come talk to me. I would be interested to hear it. It's really not the case here. We really need good governance structures and good regulation to solve this. The companies are not going to do it by themselves. And with that, I think we're good on time, and we even would have time for 1 or 2 questions, I think, because before we have to move over. So if there's any questions, we can put on our...
we only have one headset?
Yeah, I guess so. We can pass around the mic if there's a question.
Do we have a second headset? Or
No.
Okay. So we'll have to tell each other the question.
I pass it on and you put it on?
Yeah, okay.
Hi, thank you. Is there anything that you would recommend to us as private persons or also as employees of often highly digitalized companies or organizations that we could do apart from supporting your policy goals, but just something we should take care of or take into thought in our daily routine of working?
Yeah. Did you hear the question?
I think I did, yeah.
Okay. Do you want to go first?
On private options or recommend. The question was, if I got it right, whether there's any recommendations for consumers, for private citizens, what to do, what choices to make, and so on. And that's a fair question. I get that a lot, but I'm reluctant to answer it in the straightforward way because I really think we need to focus on the structural problem and on the systemic answers to this problem, because if we push this down on the consumers, we end up with what we have in other climate policy areas where, people are still boarding flights but with a bad conscience, and then we end up still chatting with a ChatGPT but with a bad conscience. That doesn't really solve the problem and help us anywhere. So that's why I'm not giving any, just use this model or just do this, because I really think we need to name the enemy here, and that is big tech, and they need to be regulated.
Maybe a quick note I fully agree, on the employees from big tech companies. They are sometimes organizing around these climate issues, and that's really important. Actually, when Amazon announced its climate goal, this did not come out of nowhere. This came the day of a major walkout of all the employees that was planned because they didn't have climate goals. So the people inside the companies are doing amazing work, the ones that are organizing to pressure the companies, because they are not going to act on their own. And yet consumers, I think it's really good just to be aware of what is the energy consumption of what you're using. That doesn't mean it's all on you to solve the problem, though. Any other questions?
Thanks. Is there more questions? I think we could fit in one more question, or do we need to stop?
Yeah.
Okay, too bad. But please come find us after the talk if you have more questions. We're happy to chat.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.